What's going on, everybody? I am back, episode number 199 of the Club and Sub podcast. A little late getting on here because I am having some tech issues, but hopefully resolved now. Yeah, guys, if you like the show, drop a like, subscribe. It would help us out, help myself and Lags. Lags is working late tonight, so just going to be me doing it. As usual, brought to you guys by fightnumbers.com for 30% off your first month subscription. Use the promo code CLUB. They got the live odds screen from John Kelly. They got his DFS projections. They got bets from Pepe and Ozzy, and they got the trends tool. It's very cool and almost certainly will help you make some more money betting MMA, playing DFS. Before we get into this week's card, I'm going to briefly discuss last week, which was a pretty annoying card, to be honest, because going into it, I had told myself, like most of the week, I was going to stick with the core of the guys that I liked. And then, something I've been trying to do recently is play. Josh said, "Where's the bag of hat?" Always Mets hats, bro. Always Mets hats. Something I've been trying to do recently is size up when the line moves in my direction, just because it's kind of confirming my thoughts. And so I did that in a couple spots. So, which ended up being terrible because every bet I made late on last week's card lost 0 for 4. So overall, I lost 5.59 units. First bet of the night, I had 3.1 units on Cody Gibson, minus 155. Great price. He closed minus 400. Great bet. I also had, though, Gibson wins by submission at a plus 520 for 0.4 units and the under 2.5 for plus 180 for a unit. So that fight really gave me made me physically ill, since Cody was basically attempting submissions from the opening bell through the end of that fight. was not fun. So that was cool. I made a little bit of money there, but ultimately I lost. I had the CD Armfield under 2.5 and plus 146. Honestly, with these new gloves, it just might not be worth going after these in these kind of lower weight class, striking fights, because they both landed a lot of solid shots, but it really didn't get close though. So other than that, I had a unit on Jack Shore plus 267. No real regret there. Honestly, Jack was competing fine. Fought him pretty close in the first round. He looked fine for the 40 seconds or so the second round went till he ate that knee. Sick knee by Zalal, but I would have made that play again. I bet Pedro Munoz plus 155 as that line was getting smashed. That ended up closing all the way up to plus 190. And honestly, not a great bet. My concern was Zahabi might be able to outmaneuver him and just land harder head strikes. And that's pretty much exactly what happened. And it's kind of the reverse of what I was talking about, where, the market went against me, but I was like, it's gotten too far. I have to bet this. I also had, I lost 3.59 units. I also had Jasmine minus 160. That was a great price. She smashed. She submitted Ariane Lipsky. I had Marc-Andre Barriault. This one hurt my soul. I played him at minus 196 on Saturday. Blew out to minus 260. I put 2.94 unit risk on him. I knew the first round could potentially be tough, though I was kind of bullish on him having a better first round versus Stoltzfus than he usually did. But he got dropped by a kick to the leg, the first exchange of the fight. Spent most of the round on bottom, and then he got up and just brawled in the pocket with him. And honestly, I wasn't even upset about that as it was happening. I was like, oh my God, MAB is going to win this kind of fight all day. And then Dustin just iced him. Now, that's partially because he was being reckless, but I also think, we may be getting to the point, though, where MAB's chin is starting to deteriorate a bit. I mean, he obviously got KO'd very, very bad by Joe Pyfer very recently, and prior to that by Chidi Njokuani. And then I had 2 units on Rose Namajunas plus 117. Pretty frustrating, but I guess if Aaron was going to win this fight, that was how it was going to look, because the first 2 rounds played out more or less to my expectation. I knew the back 2 rounds, she'd probably start to get a bit tired, but considering she had just gone 5 rounds at elevation, I thought she'd be able to fight through it a bit better than she did. Credit to Blanchfield, she stepped on the gas and never let off the gas there, and she just wore Rose out. It was a really nice performance for her, especially given how outskilled she was on the feet in that fight. So it was a nice win for Aaron Blanchfield. I also had 3 units on Brandon Moreno at minus 150. Obviously, that was a very good bet. Fight was not competitive. But yeah, the late ads just absolutely killed me. So that was pretty frustrating. We'll get into this card. I have one bet right now. I'm not sure if I'll hold it or not. I will probably have a few bets. It's a weird card, and it's not one I don't like love anything on it, but I do think with the way chalk's been running lately, like some of these lines are just getting juiced totally out of control. And if you think of dogs plus EV, you kind of got to keep going for it, even if they're not hitting, because eventually it's going to turn around. So there's a couple spots like that this week. But yeah, I'll get into it. First fight, we got Gore, Antonio Trocoli. Current price, I believe Gore is, minus 162. The comeback on Trocoli, plus 142. I kind of lean Trocoli here. I might play him. My initial pre-tape thoughts were Gore had to be the side on physicality. But just in like rewatching Trayshawn Gore, I mean, if you guys have been watching the show long enough, I've made my thoughts on him clear a bunch of times. He's obviously a very physically gifted athlete, good calf kicks, decent power, good athleticism. But I think his power is overrated because of his physique. He hasn't hurt that many guys in the octagon, and he just doesn't do enough. He's a guy who just gives away volume. He gets out attempted like 2-1 at distance on the feet. And I'm looking at this fight, and I feel like, I don't love Trocoli, but he's a lot bigger than Gore, like way, way bigger than Gore. If he gets Gore down, he should have an advantage. But even if he doesn't, like I'm at the point with Gore where until he shows me he can actually throw strikes in volume on a consistent basis, it's hard to trust him against anybody on the feet unless he's hurting them repeatedly. So, I mean, with that dynamic, it's like grappling edge for Trocoli, big experience edge. Probably not a physicality edge, but if he gets on top, he should have big success. And the upside of him potentially just being able to kick Gore on the outside, I kind of think Trocoli's the side. I haven't played it, but I'm considering it. Next up, we got Cortavius Romeus. He's taking on Gaston Balanos. Current price, Romeus minus 215. The comeback on Balanos, plus 185. I bet an early Romeus price, like 2 units, to win 2 units at minus 160. I don't know if I will keep this, though. Yeah, I do think there's a very, very clear path here for Romeus if he wants it. He's got decent cardio, and he's a pretty good wrestler with okay jiu-jitsu. And Balanos, if you get this guy flat on the mat, he just has nothing there. I mean, Aaron Phillips, not a good fighter, not even close to UFC level, got like 4 takedowns and 6 minutes of control. So I think Romeus, who comes from a grappling background, should be able to get pretty easy takedowns and control Balanos here fairly easily and or sub him. On the feet, I like Romeus' speed and athleticism. I think he's a lot faster and a much better athlete. My issue is I do think Balanos is a more skilled kickboxer. He's obviously got a lot more experience. He's older. He's fought better fighters in the aggregate than Romeus has. And so the question is, will Romeus give himself, enough rope here or fight this fight intelligently enough to make the kickboxing not matter? Because I do think that's what it comes down to. I don't really think Balanos, if Romeus decides he's going to wrestle, has a whole lot for him there. I think Romeus can probably get easy control if he wants it. My concern is just, fading, these kind of steps up in experience is like a dangerous proposition, especially at juice. So I haven't decided. I might free roll out of it or just free roll Romeus on the fight, but I do think he should win the fight. And I wouldn't really recommend a bet on Balanos at plus 185. Next fight, Melissa Mullins taking on debutante Claudia Segula or Segula. I'm not sure how you pronounce it. Current price, Melissa Mullins. Yeah, sorry. Formerly Dixon. Current price, Mullins minus 240. The comeback on Segula plus 205. I think Mullins is the side here, even at chalk. Obviously she had a bad performance in her last fight against the French chick. What is her name? I can't remember off the top of my head. Was finished in that fight. But the truth is, Mullins is pretty physical. She's a solid grappler for a female fighter. And Segula, to me, I look at her. First of all, I don't really even know why she's getting a call to the UFC. To me, she strikes me as a can crusher. I mean, I'm just going to pull it up now, but her level of competition is putrid. Her last fight was against a 6-9 woman. Fight before that, 1-0, 5-2, 0-1. And, the tape bears that out. She's fighting women who are just not good at all. And, Mullins, I don't think Mullins is the best fighter in the world. And I think, whenever she is at anytime she fights someone who's got the tools to get up and strike with her, I think she'll be in trouble. But I don't really think Segula has that. Have I laid minus 240 on Mullins? No, I haven't. But I do think the line could probably be a little bit wider. I don't see a ton of finishing equity on the Seula side. And with that being the case, I mean, Mullins just has so much more grappling equity in this fight. So I lean that direction. Moving on, Cody Staman, Blackshear. This is a banger fight. Current price, Blackshear minus 275. The comeback on Cody plus 235. I think this line is pretty disrespectful, personally. I like Blackshear. Don't get me wrong. I think he's a good fighter. Tall, long, okay output on the feet. Good counter grappler, decent wrestler. He's got a lot of good tools at 135, and I'd expect him to probably be a 500 to above 500 fighter there. But, going through Blackshear's career, he has not really ever demonstrated a minus 250 skill set. And that's against far worse fighters than Cody Staman. Obviously got knocked out by Montel Jackson in his last fight. I don't really take much from that fight. Mario Batista, same deal. He's a really good fighter. But, other than that, he fought Luan Lacerda and Jose Johnson and Farid Basharat. Now, he's fought well in all of the fights he's fought in, but he hasn't looked a giant favorite at all, except against the Lacerda fight. But Lacerda, I think he's out of the UFC now. It's just not a very good fighter. Staman, conversely, it seems like the market is treating him like his time in the UFC is up, which, understandable. He has been on whatever the reverse of a roll is. He's been on a skid here. He's 2-4 or 2-5 in his last 7. I didn't even realize that. But the truth is the guys he's losing to are very, very good fighters. He fought Taylor Lapilus in his last fight, and he wasn't able to grapple Lapilus, who's a very good defensive grappler. And Lapilus is probably a top 5 to 7 striker in the division, and he just outstruck him for the fight. I don't think there's any shame in that loss at all. He fought DSDA, Douglas De Silva and Andrade, the fight before that, and that was a very, very competitive fight that DSDA kind of managed to steal on. I don't think it was a bad decision, but I think he won the fight on pretty thin margins, and I think there was a pretty good case for Staman winning that fight. He fought Luan Lacerda himself, won a unanimous decision against him, knocked out Eddie Wineland, and then the last 2 losses before that are Said Nurmagomedov and Merab Dvalishvili. Cody Staman, he's not having he's not having bad losses. My biggest issue with Staman as a fighter is he's tiny. He's ripped, but he's 5'6", I believe, with a 64-inch reach, which is obviously not ideal, especially against someone who's taller and long, giving up 8 inches of reach to someone like Blackshear. But Staman's not a bad striker. He's fast. He's got pretty good boxing on the inside. He's got an okay kicking game. And the big thing for me here in analyzing this price is I don't really see much grappling equity on the Blackshear side. He grappled until he got submitted. He grappled very competitively with Aljo back in the day. Staman did. He fought Merab really close, and Merab wasn't able to dominate Staman grappling. Tristan said his short arm is criminal. It's true. He's literally like a T-Rex, like in here. But he's a good fighter, Cody's a very skilled fighter. And I think Daman is a very skilled fighter and probably has a higher ceiling, but it's also not as if Daman is 35 years old or 25 years old, who's making huge improvements. He's 30 years old. He kind of is what he is at this stage in his career, 22 fights in. And that's a guy who has a very high floor because he can compete in most areas with most guys in the division. But he's not an elite volume guy. He's not an elite wrestler. His jiu-jitsu is very good, but again, I wouldn't say is elite. And so I look at this fight, and I feel like neither guy is very likely at all to get a finish. And let's see, I'm curious what the total is here, actually. It's probably minus 500. The over is minus 360. I don't think either guy's very likely to get a finish. I think the volume is going to probably be pretty close. I can't imagine Blackshear putting up anywhere near the kind of volume or standing success that, say, Taylor Lapilus had. I just don't see that happening. And so, to me, it just seems like a close fight. I think I would favor Blackshear on youth, and I think Blackshear of the two is the more likely to get to a dominant grappling position. I just think it's hard to project that. So I'll probably bet Cody. I think, being priced the same as he was against Lapilus doesn't make much sense here. Next up, Charlie Radkey taking on Matt Semmelsberger. Current price, Radkey minus 150 to come back on Semmelsberger plus 130. I'm considering playing Semmelsberger. My personal opinion of Radkey is that the market is too high on him. He's had 3 fights in the UFC. In the first fight, he had Blood Diamond, which, he handled him as he should, won the fight fairly dominantly, beat him up in the clinch, took him down a bit, even did okay, or even hurt Blood Diamond on the feet. Then he fought Gilbert Urbina. And I think this is why the market is high on Radkey, because Urbina had some hype, if you guys recall. And I think he was like minus 200 in that fight. And Radkey knocked him out in the first round. But Urbina, if you go back through his career, I mean, the guy, I don't want to call him a bum. He's not that, but he is kind of flaky, and he's had a history of like disappointing in big spots. But it was a nice performance from Radkey, but nothing crazy. And then he fights Carlos Prates, and he gets finished in a couple minutes, with a body kick. But I've seen nothing from Radkey that suggests, this is some kind of a dominant or some kind of a powerhouse or a guy who's coming for the top 10 or 15. Radkey's 34 years old. This guy's career is not almost over, but he is certainly closer to the end of his career than he is to the beginning of his career. And he's fighting Matthew Semmelsberger, who's a bit younger at 31. And Semmelsberger, he's come on hard times lately. He lost that split decision to Jeremiah Wells, which was brutal. Obviously, he got finished by Uros Medic. And in his last fight, he went to a decision with Preston Parsons and lost that. Semmelsberger, the big issue that he's had with his game in general has been like very good wrestlers have been able to get him down and have a ton of control there, which I think is an argument for the Radkey side here, that maybe he can get some takedowns and get a bunch of control. But I'm fairly skeptical of that. I don't think Radkey's right. I mean, he was not having an easy time taking down Blood Diamond. If Radkey was a really good grappler, I would have expected him to absolutely cook Blood Diamond on the map, but that isn't what happened. And so I don't think he'll get easy takedowns against Staman or Zaleski, against Semmelsberger. And I think on the feet, I think Semi hits a bit harder than he does, actually quite a bit harder than he does. I trust his volume a little bit more. I think of the two, he's the far more likely one to be making improvements here. I don't know. I kind of think Semmelsberger's got a bit more finishing upside here. I think the grappling upside of Radkey. I mean, I'm not saying it couldn't happen. Like if it turns out he can get easy takedowns on Semmelsberger, then yeah, I mean, he could dominate this fight. But I don't think it's very likely to happen, in my opinion. And so, yeah, I think the line is perhaps underpricing Semmelsberger a bit here. He's got better wins than Radkey does. He's a more experienced fighter, and he's 3 years younger. So I kind of lean that direction. I haven't decided if I'll play him yet, but I am leaning towards Semmelsberger. Next up, we got Mansour Abdul Malik taking on Dusko Fedorovich. Current price, Abdul Malik, the debutant, really big favorite here. Minus 365. The comeback on Dusko, plus 300. I don't know, man. I want to bet Dusko here because the price feels absurd for a guy who, in Abdul Malik, to me, looks very, very green, and like he's not quite ready skill-wise for the UFC. Coming in and fighting a guy in Dusko who's got 16 fights. He's got a bunch of good wins on his resume. He's a fairly well-rounded fighter. I have a couple concerns, though. Like I said, I think Abdul Malik is a very green fighter. His boxing is very sloppy. He has pretty poor defense. I think his wrestling is pretty meh, and I don't really love his defensive grappling all that much. But the guy is a very good athlete. He's very, very fast. He carries a fair amount of power. And I mean, to me, at least, he looks like one of the more athletic guys in that division already. And like, that's something I wouldn't care that much about, except for one, Dusko is very, very easy to hit. He's someone who fights with his hands down all the time, and he's going to be giving away a huge speed disadvantage here against a much bigger hitter. But the other thing is Dusko is also coming off 2 ACL surgeries, and that's a pretty bearish indicator to me, like pretty clear, or I shouldn't say clear, but I think you should expect some decline in his game, 30, 31 years old, or even if he's 29, I'm not sure, but like 2 ACL surgeries, I'd expect his game to decline. I don't want to say fairly hard, but enough that you'd be concerned. And Dusko, the best thing about him is he's a decent grappler and he's fairly well-rounded and high output, but if he starts to lose some of that or lose some of his mobility, he's in trouble, especially since he fights with his hands down. And, off 2 ACLs, I kind of think you have to assume his mobility is going to be a bit shot here. So I look at the fight and I feel, yeah, if Dusko can kind of survive the early storm, he can win this fight, maybe out-scramble Abdul Malik, maybe even take over on the feet and the striking. I just feel that's going to be a tough ask in the first 7 minutes. Not that I project Malik to finish him in the first 7 minutes. I just think he's going to have a lot of issues. And to me, rather than take the tail risk on Dusko just being like way, way declined off 2 ACL surgeries, I'd much rather wait, watch it live, see how he's moving, and then also wait till most of the danger is gone for Malik. In his Contender Series fight against Wes Schultz, he looked okay early, but he looked like he was slowing down bad in round 2 of that fight. But then Schultz just death gassed even harder than him. And if he starts to slow down against Dushko, I would expect Dushko to take over pretty hard. But, maybe you can make an argument for playing him early at plus 300, but I think there's enough danger and enough of an athleticism gap that I don't really want to do that. So I'm going to look for Dushko live, but I do think the Malik price is kind of crazy. Next up, we have Zaleski Dosantos. He's taking on Zach Krogan. I have not taped this fight. Dosantos is like minus 500. I mean, he was originally supposed to fight Nick Dalby, and based on Skrogan's Tapology page, he looks like a can crusher to me, so I'd assume Zaleski probably handles him, but I can't give much insight into it. Luana Pinheiro, Jillian Robertson. Jillian's a big favorite here. She is priced all the way up at minus 375. Comeback on Pinheiro is plus 310. I don't have a ton of issues with the price, to be honest. My initial thoughts was maybe Luana because, Luana early in fights, she's very athletic. She hits hard. She's very fast. I don't think she's super easy to grapple early in fights. The problem is I just think, first of all, her cardio is very, very poor, and she uses a ton of explosive energy. And so I think it's basically putting her in a situation where she's got to hurt or finish Robertson early in this fight. And that's a very, very tough ask for Pinheiro because Robertson's very, very durable, and it's women's 115 after all. 2, I think once Robertson gets on top and gets her flat in her back, she's not going to have anything for her. Robertson obviously elite on top, and Pinheiro, once she gets flattened out, just doesn't offer a lot. So, Pinheiro should have a big speed and athleticism edge in this fight. And early in the fight, she should really tag up Jillian, but I can't really project a finish for Pinheiro at a high price here. If anything, honestly, Tristan saying Pinheiro around 1 plus 1,800. That's not bad. I don't think it's all of her finishing. Maybe she can win a decision by hurting Jillian in rounds 1 and 2, right? But I do think that's like the large plurality of her finishing ability in this fight. Something I do kind of think about is the goes the distance at plus 160 because it is a chick fight. The problem is Jillian, for a female fighter, is a finisher. She's a grappler, and if she gets on top, she's a dangerous submission grappler. I think Pinheiro can likely survive the jiu-jitsu exchanges early in this fight, but as it gets later and she gets tired, I'd kind of expect Jillian to take over and probably finish, so I'm probably going to pass that. But, I think the price is fine on Robertson. She should win this fight somewhat comfortably, even if she struggles round 1. And actually, speaking of which, you could make an argument that's going to be the best way to play Robertson in this fight because I do think there's a non-zero chance she eats a bunch of howitzers early on and loses the first round. And if that happens, maybe you get an entry into the minus 150, minus 180 range. I wouldn't mind that at all. Moving on, we have Gerald Mearshart, GM3. He is taking on debutante, former 1FC middleweight champion, Renier de Ridder. Interesting scrap. GM3 is a pretty big underdog here. De Ridder minus 285. The comeback on GM3 plus 245. I'm considering playing GM3. I taped De Ridder, and obviously, the guy comes from a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu background. He's known for being a grappler. But I don't think his MMA game is very good at all for the UFC. Almost all of the guys he fought over and won were just total bums. So he was kind of able to just bum rush, take down, and dominate. But to me, when I watch him fight, his wrestling looks pretty poor to me. His gas tank looks pretty poor to me. And his striking defense looks just absolutely atrocious. I'm confident that Gerald is the much better striker here of the two of these guys. I am confident Gerald is likely the tougher of the two of these guys, and I'm semi-confident he's got better cardio than De Ridder does. The issue for me is Gerald seems shop-worn at this point in time. He hasn't really looked like the same fighter in quite a while. You look back at the Edmund fight. Now, Edmund would always be a tough fight because of his athleticism, but, he basically just played the Homer Simpson until Edmund got tired and then took over that fight. And my concern here is I think Gerald is pretty obviously physically declining. And, De Ridder, I don't really rate his game at all, but he is very physically strong and he's very aggressive, which makes me think there's a semi-strong possibility he could just run through Gerald on physicality early in this fight and potentially finish him. On top of which, going back and watching the Dustin Stoltzfus fight kind of makes me nervous because Stoltzfus kind of dominated that fight for the most part. And then, Meerschaert did Meerschaert things and got a round 3 sub. But if Dustin Stoltzfus was doing that, I think there's a non-zero chance Fernando Ritter could do something similar. But with that said, I'm still considering a Gerald bet here. I feel the market, it's pricing in almost all of de Ritter's upside, which is him being able to dominate the grappling early in this fight or physically overpower Meerschaert, and not pricing in the ability that Meerschaert, or the possibility that Meerschaert could scramble with him, Meerschaert could potentially sub him, or that, he uses too much energy the first 7 or 8 minutes and Meerschaert just takes over, beats him up, and finishes him. I think this is a decent step up in competition for de Ritter from most of the guys he's fought in his career. Like I said, the only reason I'm just not sure is like GM3 seems pretty dusty to me. He does not seem like he's the same guy he once was. So I have a fair amount of concerns in that regard. I do kind of like the over, although it's up to -200, the over 1.5 now. I kind of like fight goes the distance. I could see that happening. Gerald's not an easy guy to sub. It's funny because he's got 8 submission losses on his record, but I think only 1 in like his last 15 or 20 fights. But yeah, I'm kind of interested in playing the fight to go long. Maybe taking a look at some late Meerschaert sub props. I think those could be kind of interesting. But yeah, I'm not very bullish on de Ritter, but it does seem like the UFC is making this fight to give him like a highlight coming into the UFC after coming in with a fair amount of hype, like with what he did in 1 and being their 185-pound champion for as long as he was. Next up, we got Bernardo Sopaj, Sopaj. I don't know if it's Sopaj or Sopaj. I think it's Sopaj, fighting Ricky Turcios. Current price, Sopaj -350 to come back on Turcios +275. Again, I really think this price is nuts. And it's funny because when I first saw it on DK had Sopaj like -160, I just couldn't get enough down. But I was like, man, that's a crazy price. Sopaj should be like -200 here. But I mean, now it's blown out, and I just don't get this. So when I'm thinking about this fight, I like Sopaj as a prospect. He seems pretty talented. He has decent power and pretty good boxing. He's a decent wrestler, has a decent top game. But I don't think he's great at anything yet in this point in his career. I don't think he's good at pacing himself. We saw that in the Vinicius de Oliveira fight in his last time out. He gassed pretty badly, albeit that fight was on very short notice. But still, it was the last 7 or 8 minutes of that fight were a horrendous look for him. And he's fighting a guy in Ricky Turcios who all he does is bring pace, So I look at it, and on the one hand, I feel, yeah, Sopaj is a lot younger. He's 24 years old. He packs more power in his shots than Turcios does. He should really land the more eye-catching blows early here. I think he's got way more equity for a knockout early in this fight. But with that said, I don't really see any other edges for him because I don't, even though he's a decent wrestler, I really don't think he's going to control Turcios. I think if he tries to grapple Turcios, he is just going to get outworked in those grappling exchanges, likely exhaust himself badly. And I don't want to say collapse down the stretch, but he could collapse down the stretch. And in the striking, I like Ricky's volume a lot more than I like Sopaj's volume in this fight. He throws many, many more strikes. He's constantly working. And so when I'm thinking about it, I feel, yeah, it makes some sense. Benito saying Sopaj, what's the price on Sopaj by KO? Because I do think that's potentially playable. Because I think to get to this price, you have to think that's pretty likely. Plus 325. It's not awful, but if you think he deserves to be -350, I don't think that's bad. Yeah, I mean, I guess the way I think about it is, yes, while they're fresh, Sopaj should land the more eye-catching shots and should likely bank rounds in this fight. But if Ricky brings the kind of pace that he normally brings, I don't think Sopaj is going to keep that kind of stopping power past a round or two in all likelihood, which probably means, I shouldn't say probably, but it does give Ricky some scope for taking over this fight. And like I said, the reason I would think about Ricky pre versus live is if Sopaj decides to go the wrestling route here, I think he could just lose this fight from the jump. We saw in his last fight, Raul Rosas subbed Ricky, but Ricky won the first round unanimously, basically just outworking him in grappling transition, throwing a ton of ground strikes. So, I mean, Ricky, I think, is the better grappler and the much higher volume striker. So the best case you get here on the Sopaj side is power, which makes sense. Like I am fine with Sopaj in the minus 185 to minus 200 range, but I'm considering Turcios. The line feels like pretty wide to me at this point. Speaking of lines that feel pretty wide, here we go again. Denise Gomez, minus 500, minus 550, taking on Karolina Kowalkiewicz, plus 420. Again, I mean, look, I understand the thought process behind why Gomes is a large favorite. It makes sense. You know, she's got okay volume, she's got okay cardio, and she throws very, very hard. Taking on a woman in Karolina who throws a lot of volume but doesn't throw that hard. Gomez is a much younger fighter, making improvements. She should come out here, probably beat Karolina. I agree with that. But I also think when you look at Denise Gomez, man, it is... I bet her in her last fight against Eduardo Mora, but the thing about Gomez is you want to bet her against women of commensurate volume or cardio where she's got large power edges. Now, she's got a large power edge in this fight, but I think she's at a pretty clear cardio disadvantage against Kowalkiewicz. She's at a pretty clear output disadvantage, too. You know, Karolina, if they fight 15 minutes, is going to throw a lot more strikes and is going to land a lot more strikes. She's at an experience disadvantage. She's got all the hype coming behind her here, and I don't think she's got much grappling upside. And that's kind of the biggest thing, because to get to minus 550 in a women's fight, you have to really believe there is a healthy amount of grappling upside there, unless the woman is Amanda Nunes, and Denise Gomes is not that. And I just don't believe that. You know, and we saw her slow down very badly against Mora herself. I don't know. I kind of think Karolina's live here. I personally price Gomes about minus 250 in this fight. I think that's fair because she does have, you know, the physicality edge. She's got more power. Should be at least able to moderately compete on output. But rewatching the Angela Hill fight back, granted, Angie's probably better than Karolina at this point, but I think Karolina can execute a similar game. You know, box with her a bit in the pocket, beat her up a bit in the clinch, maybe land a couple takedowns here or there. Maybe take over on cardio. I don't know. I just think this price is nuts. I just don't see the scope for Gomes covering minus 550. And someone like, if Karolina was a bit more fragile, I'd get it. But in some respects, it's a lot like the Savannah Gomez Juarez fight. Gomes is better than Gomez Juarez because she's a lot younger and improving. But it's a kind of a similar dynamic because Gomes isn't the most high volume ever. She relies a lot on her power. And we saw in that fight, it played out super close, and Karolina edged it just basically on outpointing her, getting a bit of grappling in here and there. And I think that can happen here. Do I favor it to happen? No, I favor Gomes fairly comfortably. But I do think the line is wide, and I may end up coming in on Karolina. You know, we'll see it. What's the total here? I'm actually curious about that too. Minus 300, which is the over 2.5, which also seems pretty stupid to me. I don't really see a lot of equity for. I shouldn't say I don't see a lot of equity. I can imagine it, but I mean, 70% to go the distance feels like it should be wider to me. And then to the main event, Carlos Prates, Neil Magny, minus 750. Prates, Neil Magny, plus 550. Again, the line feels pretty stupid to me. I mean, to me, the whole question of whether or not there's huge value on Magny or whether or not it's appropriately lined comes down to how proactively Prates is about ripping calf kicks in this fight. If he goes for them, I think he's going to chew Magny's leg off and probably finish him fairly early in this fight. If Magny, however, is able to close distance and tie this guy up in the clinch, I am not really sure what happens. You know, Prates has a good clinch game. He's got a good tie clinch. But in the over-under positions against the fence, Magny's really, really good in those spots. And he's a lot more physical than he looks when he gets there because he's very, very tall and he knows how to use his leverage well. And if he can kind of drag Prates into that kind of fight where it's very, very clinch heavy and he's getting takedowns and whatnot, I do think he can break Prates. He's got much better cardio. He's got a much better work rate. So I think the scope for Magny winning this fight is there. The issue I have is, again, it's like Prates' volume is much more reliable on the feet. Calf kicks are basically a death sentence for Magny at this point in his career. We've just seen the man can't handle calf kicks. And, I mean, the hardware gap is large. Prates is a pretty big hitter. Magny's not super durable anymore. Magny doesn't possess much pop himself. So, I mean, Prates is a large favorite. Makes sense. But I do think this is a bit on the wide side, though. Minus 750 for a guy. I mean, the Leach win was impressive, no doubt. But it was Leach off a 3-year layoff and a major, major injury. But other than that, he hasn't really done anything to kind of imply this fight power rating wise against Magny. And yeah, I mean, Tristan just mentioned it in the chat. You know, Prates was easily taken down by Mitch Ramirez. That's true. I don't think he's the worst grappler in the world. Like, I didn't mind the way he went for sweeps in that fight to get up. So like I don't think Prates is like fucked if he gets taken down, but it is one of those things where Magny can do that for 20 rounds, you know. Whereas if Prates isn't keeping this in space and like ripping kicks and lighting Magny up at distance, and he's constantly getting dragged into the clinch in this fight, he's going to be in like deep shit. You know, like one fight that comes to mind just thinking about this that it kind of reminds me of on some level is the Daniel Rodriguez fight with Magny. Now, I think Prates is a lot better than Daniel Rodriguez. He's just younger, faster, and more dangerous on the feet. But if Magny was to have his way and pull off an upset here, I think it would look a lot like that fight. But all of that said, I mean, I do favor Prates to win this fight fairly comfortably. I just feel like the current price, again, just doesn't really make terribly much sense. So, yeah, I mean, those are my thoughts. I might play Magny if it blew out further. I think the over 2.5 at plus 175 is kind of interesting. Magny's not an easy guy to finish, man. Like, he went the distance with Ian Gary on one leg. He went the distance with Jeff Neal. He's not. I don't think it's going to be that easy for Prates to finish him. So, you know, yeah. I mean, Benino's right. They've both Turcios and Magny have no power. They're actually similar dynamics. Those two fights, except Turcios does not have better wrestler than Sopaj, whereas Magny is a better wrestler than Prates. But yeah, I don't know. I think the over 2.5 is kind of interesting. Even maybe taking like some smaller pokes on goes the distance. Plus 500 seems really, really crazy to me. You know, Neil Magny, let's see, how many times has he been finished in his career? I mean, a handful, but it's usually by guys who are submitting him. I'd be a little, I mean, he could get KO'd, obviously, but yeah, I mean, I don't know. I'm kind of interested in these props in this fight to go long. Maybe even like some Prates decision stuff. But yeah, we'll see what happens. I lean the Magny side of the number. Only bet I've made so far is Cortavius Romeus. I'll obviously put my thoughts out on Saturday like I always do, but I am interested in a couple of these bigger dogs. I think we're starting to see this both from a market standpoint, both with underdogs and with totals. If you guys have noticed over the last month or so, we're seeing some of these over 2.5s in men fights balloon out to like minus 300, minus 400, minus 500. We've never really seen that before. I think a lot of it's the new gloves and that finishes aren't happening at that high a clip right now. But I also don't think that's really sustainable. Like you talk, I mean, how long have we had the new gloves? 150 fights, maybe 180. You know, that's not enough of a sample to say that like finishes have decreased by 20%, you know? So I do think, you know, you might actually be starting to get value on some of these crazy overs that seem like they couldn't possibly miss. And similarly, I kind of think that's starting to happen with dogs. You know, it's been such a juice heavy year, especially the last like 2 months or so, that you know, these dogs just keep getting betting out further and further and further every fight. So, yeah, I mean, that's my thoughts on the card, guys. I like Romeus. If you like the show, drop a like, subscribe. Lags and I'll be back next week doing UFC 309, I believe. It's a John Jones fight week. I wish we had a more interesting fight to talk about than him versus Stipe Miocic. I bet him last time they fought at minus 260. He's now minus 700. Good fucking times. But it is what it is. It's actually a pretty fun card in the aggregate, that card. You know what? I have you guys here. There's no lags with me. We'll run through it real quick. Having some fun. Yeah, I mean, Jones Miocic minus 700, plus 500. Oliveira Chandler, Silva Araujo, Paul Craig against Bo Nickel. Chris Weidman against Eric Anders. It's kind of interesting to me. I have to tape it, but I think Weidman or Anders might be a decent time to sell Weidman stocks. You know, I bet him last fight against Bruno Silva at plus 240. I don't understand him, his equity going down necessarily against Eric Anders. Damon Jackson and Jim Miller. Yeah, I mean, it's a banger card. I'm really excited to break it down next week. So we'll see you guys next week, same time, 7 p.m. Eastern. It's our 200th episode, so we'll probably get a guest on here. We'll probably have a big giveaway for you guys. It's a John Jones week also. But yeah, guys, let's get it this weekend. Good luck on your bets if you're with me. Good luck if you're against me. Hopefully we cash it. Peace, everybody.